Fantastic. So let's jump into it. The topic today is negotiation. We all go through it every single day. What does Chris Voss say from Never Split the Difference? Every day you're negotiating, whether it's buying a coffee cup from Starbucks, whether it's negotiating the big deal at work. The way it goes is everything is a negotiation at work, or everything is a negotiation in everyday life. So I think it's great that we talk about this topic, and it's something you can practice every single day, which is amazing. And if you are obviously an avid listener, we're getting in the fan mail from people wanting to learn a little bit more about how to do this in their jobs. Do we have any relevant stories that we can talk about? Abby, over to you.
Yeah, great intro. Thanks, Dave. I think you're right. One of the analogies that really struck me about negotiations very early on is kind of what you said, which is everyone's negotiating all the time. Starting from when you're a baby and when you're calling out to your mom asking for milk. It's a negotiation. You're exchanging vocal cords to get more food. I know that sounds a bit weird, but
I think it sounds beyond weird, but I like where you're going with this. So.
But it's a negotiation, right? It's offering. It's basically saying, if you don't give me food, I'm going to blow the roof off with my boys, and that's kind of negotiation. I think it's inbuilt. It's in all of us humans. We're doing it all the time. We're doing it unconsciously. One of my first ever conscious stories of negotiation was when I got my first job. Right, I remember back in the day. Let me not get specific here, so people don't know I'm 62. Back in the day,
1960s, when you got your first roles, coming out of university, a keen, hungry person.
Just after the Cold War, yeah, just after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And basically, I remember not really having the skill set on paper to be getting this job that I'd applied for, but I was able to sort of maneuver and unconsciously negotiate and convince and sell my position at this job and sell myself as the man for the job, and that set my career in motion, and that kicked my career off. So that's one of the, I'm not going to get into the details, but it was a very defining moment for me, and I felt like without having A, the desire to, and B, of course, the small tactical tweaks that I've made through the years, I wouldn't be as good a negotiator I am today, where I am today generally in my career without that.
Fantastic. And I think it's a really good point that you make there, is everything is negotiation. And I think the biggest negotiation that you can always have is getting into your first role as well, particularly in sales, because that's where your career is going to start off. So great to hear, Abby, about that first-hand experience, and I like the reference of the time period after the Cuban Missile Crisis, as we all remember how that went down. But I think the first point that you wrote here, and I love that you've kind of negotiated mapping this out, this talk with us, and I like the notes you got down here. And the biggest thing that I think we all forget in sales is, in a negotiation, if both parties need to win. I think that's, to give context before we dive into everything, is the biggest fundamental to take away is both parties need to win. And the reason why that is, just because you've signed a contract, that does not mean the money's coming into your bank account. It does not mean the deal is done. If another party does not feel like they're getting the best out of that deal, they will stall. So if you've signed a partnership contract and you've won the best deal possible, and the other party all of a sudden realizes, we didn't like the way this went down, they're going to stall in the way they behave in that partnership. They're not going to behave in the best way. I think it's super important that if you are going to a negotiation, that the outcome is a win-win. That is the biggest, I think, thing to take away from this, is that both parties go away from the negotiation happy, because the worst thing you can have, particularly in sales, is an unhappy client. They're not going to perform at the level that you expected from them.
Yeah, and I think if we take a couple of steps back, and if we want to really tell our audience based on your experience and my experience of sales, one of the 4 or 5 things, if I was brand new to sales, what are the 4 or 5 tactics that I really need to keep in mind to be a good negotiator with we've broken that down in this episode, and we want to take you guys through this, right? It might sound a bit mechanical, but it's the best way to teach someone new about how to really negotiate, right? Kicking off with the first point, we're going to get straight into it. It really is about, firstly, understanding the buyer's needs. Now, I know it sounds like a bit of an oversimplification, and I know it sounds like also I know what the buyer's needs are, but I'm sure you've got a couple of stories, or I'm sure you've got a couple of anecdotes you want to share about this, Dave, but what that really means, understanding the buyer's needs.
I think it's super important that you're understanding that what is the outcome of this negotiation that the buyer wants? What is it they're really looking to do in the end of this deal? You know, is it to increase efficiency? Is it to increase their profitability? Is it to increase their growth? Whatever that outcome is, you need to really understand that you, at the end of that deal, and making sure that that negotiation and that deal that you come to addresses that and also accelerates what they want from that deal. I think that's one of the most important things. And a story for me is that, you know, in our day-to-day work, a big part of our role is making sure that our clients or the people that use our product, it's simple, it's easy to use, it doesn't impede with their day-to-day, and it's not too, you know, technical savvy for particularly the users that have to use it, because they need to use it quickly and make a decision and then move on with their day. It's not something they need to play around with or want to play around with. What that means is when we're negotiating or putting that deal together with them, we need to make sure that at the end of that process, when they start to use our product, whether it is how they pay their invoices, is very simple and easy to do. So big deals that we've worked on, we've had to now adapt our product. Instead of saying, hey, this is it, this is how you're going to receive the data, this is how your finance team's going to receive things, we've had to understand, okay, how can we make your life better when you use this product? And how can we ensure at the end of this negotiation that you're going to benefit from this and not just have, okay, I have a better way to order, but also have a better way to receive the data from those orders, which means I'm going to maximize my potential of utilizing that product. Now, on the buyer's side, that's simple because you're just building it. But on your side, how do you get the win-win, right? Because you, at the end of the day, are going to build that feature for them. So a lot of the time in these negotiations, you do what the client wants and understand their needs, but you also need to, on the other hand, make sure that you are getting the best out of that as well. And so that's something you need to take into account when you start to negotiate with them. Is it's always good to understand what they want, but remember the buyer's needs also need to match what you want out of that deal as well.
And just diving a bit deeper into sort of how to pry information out, right? The best way to get the maximum information out, aka to understand buyer's needs, is really by asking the why question. So why is it that this happens in you? And it's very easy, it's a very thin line to walk, in the sense that you can at times ask in a very condescending way, but I've in fact, from my experience in the past, I've in fact also said things like, I may come across as questioning you, I may come across as interrogating you, but I'm really just trying to understand your business better. Why is it that X and Y and Z happen in your company? Why is it that X leads to Y leads to Z? Why is it that this person does this? Why is it that this process is broken? Or why is it that this process is defined in such a way? Asking those why questions can actually be really, really powerful. Another tip that's really come in handy for me is ask them open-ended questions. And what I mean by that is saying, instead of asking them, why is it that X and Y lead to Z, you can say, what happens when X process and Y process come together? Something a bit more vague that leaves enough room for your prospect to give you the 360-degree picture.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. How do you get that out of the client? And the biggest thing that I always find in the negotiation is you really need to figure out the why at the start and not during the process. You don't want to get to the negotiation and then start understanding what is their goals, what do they want to achieve out of this partnership. And what's super important, particularly as a sales leader in whatever industry you're in, is you need to set up a process for your teams, as well as if you're just a contributor to that negotiation to that deal, of how you can ensure you're getting this information and data. So really think about, how do I ensure that I'm setting the right tone from the start? How do I have the right North Star from the start? That is the most important thing you need to do, because that's how you keep the buyer interested. But that's how, when when you get to the end, or you get to, let's say, the tough part, you already know what they're expecting and what they want.
Yeah, and I think you've summed that up kind of really, really well, right? It's asking to summarize this for our audience. It's asking, it's listening, of course, researching your prospect properly, and then once you're in that meeting, really listening very actively to what they're saying, asking enough why questions and asking enough open-ended questions, and eventually gaining what truly matters. So once we've done that, we move on to the next essential aspect of negotiation. It's not an in-meeting thing, it's kind of like a pre-process thing, but I find this is a highly underrated one, Dave. No one really talks about this. Everyone talks about how you behave in the meeting, how you behave when you're with the prospect. Not many people talk about preparation, which is the second key pillar to a successful negotiation. Preparation is key. And I'm sure you prefer, because you're a sales mogul after all. I'm sure you prefer big time before we go into meetings. Walk us through that and tell me how you think about this.
I think preparation is key. Doing the basics is the most fundamental part of being a great, let's say, salesperson and great negotiator. I would say I put more effort or more time, let's say, into preparation than I actually do into the meeting themselves, or in terms of the amount of time spent. Preparation is the most key, because when you watch, I always like to use the analogy of the duck on water, right? It's just floating along in that negotiation meeting, but underneath it's kicking and kicking and kicking and kicking and kicking, unbelief. And that's really how it should be for a negotiation. You should be preparing massively, and you should be using really the BATNA approach, is something that we've mentioned. And I'm just reading off the notes you gave me, Abby, so good research on putting this together. No, but what we use normally is the BATNA approach. And what this really does is set you up for any outcome. And the most important thing you can ever do in a negotiation is understanding the risk aspects and the risk elements. It's understanding where can the meeting go, and why is the person thinking the way they think. It is one of the most vital things you can have, because in most negotiations, or let's say in a negotiation where you're arguing one perspective, they're arguing another perspective, many times you haven't prepared for why they're saying this. You hear them saying it, but you haven't prepared for why. So it's super important to understand where can the conversation go. And I would suggest even building like a tree, a mind map, or a tree map, or how would you call it, Abby?
I don't know if you mean a conversation tree. Usually, there may be lots of new jargon being thrown around. Yeah, people use decision trees and things like that. But yeah, conversation tree makes total sense.
And I would even call it a conversation tree, because it's not necessarily you're making a decision, but you need to understand where to guide that conversation and what will happen if you go through that door. If I go through this door, can I come back through at that door? Or if I go through this door with the client, does that mean I then have to move to the next door? Or does that mean I block off in coming back from that decision, from that conversation? Can I take that back? So it's super important that you prepare for what can be said, what can go wrong, and then how can you prepare for when that goes wrong? And also, can you prepare for answers that you can't answer? And what are you going to give, in a response to that? Because there's always going to be in a negotiation a time where you cannot answer a question on the spot. And you need to prepare for how to deal with that as well. So it's really understanding all the different scenarios.
I think you've touched on a great point there, right? One of the great things about preparation is almost sort of, and this is something that I've learned from some really good salespeople, is that they always anticipate what questions may arise in the meeting by putting themselves in the shoes of the prospect and already sort of rehearsing or sort of knowing briefly what the answer to those questions will be in advance before the meeting has even commenced, right? I think that's a key aspect of preparation. Another key aspect of preparation that's often overlooked: understanding competition, understanding the competitive landscape. Who are you going up against? If you're selling food delivery, are you going up against Uber? Are you going up against Grab? Are you going up against Just Eat? Are you going up against DoorDash? Those are the big players out there. Or if you're selling, I don't know, if you're selling anything, you understand the competitive landscape, know where you stand. All of that is a part of preparation. So to sum things up, I think understanding your competition, knowing what questions to anticipate, and preparing a conversation tree, as you said, Jay.
Exactly. And just remember, BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. So be prepared for all the different alternatives to that agreement, but always never lose sight of what you want, because at the end of the day, you also need to honor the agreement. And And if you don't like the agreement you get in, you're not going to be as motivated to as well. So it's really important with that. And something that we probably should have added at the start is what I always say is never be afraid to walk away from the deal. It's the most important thing I can ever say. If you cannot walk away from this deal, then you need to ask yourself some questions before why you entered into these negotiations. Because at the end of the day, a desperate person is never going to get the best outcome or the best deal. And that's in any negotiation, whether that's in a relationship, whether that's in a business, life, social. Always keep that in mind.
That's true. I think those are like, said it like a true sales mogul. I cannot agree more, honestly. And moving on to our next key point, I want to keep things ticking along here and keep delivering value. The third big point, that is something that a lot of salespeople actually use subconsciously or unconsciously, is anchoring the discussion. But what we mean by this, I'll quickly introduce this here. What we mean by anchoring the discussion is, in your mind, you kind of by now, after having prepared well, after having understood what the customers or the prospects' needs are, after having accomplished these things, you've got a rough guesstimation or an estimation of what the prospects' problems are, where the pain lies. And now you want to gear your conversation around that pain point's actual solution, right? And you constantly anchor your entire conversation, keep bringing things back to that one single pain point, or one single pain point whose answer to which is your solution.
Yeah, exactly. You want to kind of start from like, this is where I want to get to at the end of the negotiation. So whatever it is you're selling, you want to think about at the end of this deal, we would love you guys to use this as a pilot, this product. At the end of this discussion, we would love to onboard your department and start to utilize the product. At the end of this discussion, we want to give your entire organization the best deal possible for utilizing our services. So whatever it is you're doing, you need to have I call it a North Star. We call it anchoring the conversation. But this is really where you always need to put things back. And the more you can do that, and the more you can start like this and have that inception of what you wanted to do, or the genesis of your, or benchmark of your, agreement, from here, then the client in this case, or whoever you're negotiating with, they can let you know if you're on the same page. It's all about being transparent with your intentions and what you want to achieve. And that's the most important part, is when you can do that, then you can understand exactly where they're coming from. Because a lot of the time, I see it in people where they go, I don't know what the client's thinking. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know why they're not getting back. And that's probably because you haven't anchored what the end goal is in your discussion.
Yeah, and the anchor, just like I guess the original use of the anchor, which comes from shipping, it gives you a lot of control. It gives you a stable ground, and it helps you control the entire negotiation from your point of view, because negotiation is such a reactive thing. You're constantly acting and expecting a reaction, and unless you have that anchor, it's going to be hard to maneuver that conversation. So I don't want to dwell too much on this point. I think we've made a really strong point here. Anchor the conversation around the pain that you've understood through your conversation with this prospect now, and basically let the rest of that conversation flow accordingly.
The next one here, number 5, we call it concessions and compromise, but I always call it, in this aspect, is we call it slicing the salami. Is the terminology I heard in the past when I did my last negotiation course. And they call it slicing the salami, because what you're doing is you imagine those big salami sticks that you get, and imagine that's the offer you get from someone, or this is the agreement. You want to cut that up into little pieces and really understand what it is that they want to talk about, or what it is in that deal that you can break down and start to understand, right? Because you have your North Star, and when you start slicing that salami, you start to understand, do I need this aspect? Do I need that aspect? Do I not need this aspect? And that's really important, because what I would say is, there's a book called Never Split the Difference. And when you can slice the salami, you can start to trade and swap different kinds of pieces that you want a part of that deal. Now, Never Split the Difference, you never want to meet halfway. But what you can do, and what we always say is, in Sales Moguls, is swap out aspects. If they don't want this part of the deal, fine, they can take that out. But that means you're going to have something in. Always look at a negotiation as a trade in and a trade out. Never think of it as just taking things away. Whatever it is you compromise on, or whatever you feel you're compromising on, you have to have something else to replace that, or else you're going to slowly start to see your salami get sliced away, and you're not going to get a bigger piece of that pie.
You couldn't have said it better. I think, by the way, on Never Split the Difference, I found it a great book. And Chris Voss is not sponsoring this video, unfortunately. He's not a sponsor yet.
He has, obviously, in his head, he's reached out to us in a fantasy saying, Sales Moguls, I can't wait to meet you guys.
Yeah, but dream on,
Chris. Chris is a huge fan of the podcast, big fan of the channel.
He is. Great lad.
Shout out Chris Moss. I hope you're doing well, and I hope the family's doing well.
We used to call him Boss the Boss, but yeah, he is a great man. I have to say, to be a jokes apart, it is a great book, and I highly recommend it to all of our viewers. Get your hands on it if you can. If you're looking for the short version, of course, you can just watch this video. But I mean, you couldn't have said it better, Dave. I've got nothing much to really add, except I think one of the things that helps me when it comes to concessions and compromise is this onset obligation that people have when you give them something for free or give them something. The feeling of the need to reciprocate, and I think that's something that I use every now and again, not all the time, but every now and again when I have the chance to, giving a prospect, I don't know, buying them a coffee or buying them something as simple as a drink, or something where they feel like there's an onset obligation to be nice to you in the first place, and that leads eventually to a sale. So and it's something that you can't sort of mechanize, but always look to find ways to kind of create an atmosphere where they feel like there's a sense of mutual respect, and create that reciprocal sort of behavior. By doing whatever it takes, and we'd leave that sort of interpretation, right? I think the next big one, which is a huge challenge to most actually, is handling objections. And I think there's tons of content out there. There's a ton of videos, books, and general material on handling deadlocks, handling objections. How do you do it? Well, I personally, and I can give a quick introduction here, excuse me, on handling objections. Really, the way I do this is I try and always separate the objection from the end outcome. This is literally how I do it. For example, let's just say I ask a girl out, right? Or say you're asking a girl out. I mean, of course, I'm way past that stage in my life. But if I were to ask a girl out, this is an example I probably read in the book somewhere. But and then the girl says, "Oh yeah, I'd love to. Maybe I'll go out on a date with you, but I can't do 5 o'clock on a Saturday." So the way to sort of step past that is, okay, maybe Saturday 5 p.m. doesn't work, but say time was not an issue for you. Say Saturday was not an issue for you. Do you still want to do coffee sometime? Is basically your way of saying, in between where you are now and the end objective, there seems to be a blocker. But if that blocker was taken away, hypothetically, would you still want to track towards that end objective? So lots of 90% of the objections that salespeople face today is price.
Exactly. It's a very good thing you bring that up. Is for starters with objections, and thank you for the analogy there to our people out there wanting to ask anyone out on a date, girl or boys. But what I will say is that, I always think of objections as considerations, right? I like an objection. It means they're actually thinking about what you're saying, the person is. And secondly, when you want to remove that objection, that's a really good point you bring up, this price, is, if you were to say to someone, hey, look, if I gave you the price you wanted, would you sign today? If I gave you 2%, 3%, would you sign on the dotted line today? And I think that's a super important thing to think about is, whenever you're doing a deal and whenever you want to be aggressive on a deal, let's say, try to remove that barrier very quickly, right? Price, I would say, is always sometimes the most simple one to remove, because at the end of the day, if whatever your outcome is, if it's growth, and if you're trying to, really grow your client list, removing that price really makes things a little bit easier for you. And it also negates their kind of trump card, which in essence is always price. Right? Price is the biggest. Hey, could you make it cheaper? Now, I'm not saying, depending what industry you're in, obviously devaluing your product changes a lot. So in our industry, price sometimes is not the biggest devaluer for us. because we are playing the long game. We don't mind giving things cheaper because we know in 2 years, 3 years time, we can increase that price for our clients. We can demonstrate a lot of value and we can get a lot of buy-in. So an example is if we want to move into a different segment into the delivery space, from there, you can always lower your different prices to obviously be aggressive with everything. So it's super important to understand that, devaluing your price can also, depending on what you're selling, is important. So if you're selling your sales training and you devalue your price, then you're devaluing yourself and you devalue in the course. So it's super important in consumer products, devaluing price can be seen as something different. But when you're selling, your services as a B2B, let's say as a sales trainer, that can devalue yourself. And that's where you need to then lean into other, objectives they might have, which is saying that is price the only option, or is it the fact that you don't think your return on investment will outweigh what you pay? So you really need to think about what it is they're trying to ask for and dig into it. And don't be afraid to ask the tough questions.
And also don't be afraid to ask the hypothetical question, which can be it takes a lot of bravery to ask the hypothetical question. Say if price was not a factor, would you still think that this product can work for you or this solution can work for you? Or say, hypothetically, imagine a scenario, I know it's not the reality, but say price for a second was not a factor. Apart from that, is anything else? And then usually you either see if price is not an issue, I'm in. Or you see, if price is not an issue, X, Y, and Z. And then you know that, okay, these X, Y, and Z are also your obligations. So you need to objection handle those things. So the way I see it with objection handling is try and always ask the hypothetical questions and see if there are hidden objections, and then take down all of the objections one by one. But I found that hypothetical questioning being really a game changer for me in my sales trajectory.
Very true. And I think as well is understanding objections, why they're asking them, is super important, because another one is also time, right? Time, need, price. There's always different ones. Does the product fit or not? Is never looking at it. The fundamental understanding is never look at an objection as a bad thing. Look at it as a question. They want to learn more, and the people who succeed with objections are the ones who are not afraid to ask the tough questions. Not afraid to ask, hey, just to understand, you're asking about price. Is this because you have a certain budget, or is this because you don't think you'll get the nice value? What is the reason for this? And if it's about product, is it because you don't think our product will help you? I want to understand why you're asking that. And the great thing I always get in the game I always play is never answer a question straight away. I always answer a question with a question. I learned that from the UK's was Hated Sales Trainer. Shout out, another big fan of the podcast, a huge fan of the YouTube channel. But he always says ask a question with a question, and answer a question with a question, because if you answer a question on demand, they're just always going to look at you as someone that's going to be serving in the deal. But if you're someone who's out there challenging them and understanding it, they're going to more look at you as an equal playing field and feel that, okay, this person is not someone I can just push around and beat around in this negotiation with things. So always trying to answer a question with a question, not because you want to be better than the other person, but because you want to understand, why are they asking that? Why are they, what answer do they really want? Is it to do with price, or is it to do with the fact they don't believe your product is as good as they think it is? Is it to do with the fact that they don't think you can integrate well enough, or their users won't use it well enough? So really dig into that and understand that.
Yeah, and lastly, before we jump into the last couple of sections, is don't be afraid, guys. Stay calm. Objections are just objections. It's not the end of the world. If you get an objection, remain calm, remain collected, smile, and move on to the next step, and it's going to be all right? But thanks. That was really, really insightful, and I think that section is so important that we had to sort of spend more time on it, right? Now we get to the most important section, I'm sure, Dave, because you've closed many multi-million-dollar sales. We know that you're an absolute master. We want to hear from you. How do you now you've done the prep, you've anchored the conversation, you've negotiated well, you've objection handled, and now you move on to closing the deal. What are the key components of closing the deal, and how do our viewers learn what are the tactical steps that they can take to be great closers?
So I'm going to take it back to the start and say one of the key components to closing a deal on time is to know exactly who are the key decision makers to signing that deal, who are the key decision makers on the compliance of that deal, any legal aspect, because the worst choke point that ever happens in a deal is when you go to the end of the deal and all of a sudden the compliance, legal, risk aspect comes into everything. So the first key component is understand understand the exact timeline of closing that deal, exactly what needs to be done on your end to ensure you do that in a timely way.
But I want to challenge us a bit here, and I want to say the viewer in me is thinking, how do I sense that, at what stage do I start assessing how much time do these admin aspects take up?
That's a good question, and something I put together a playbook actually for the team. And what we understand is when you go to sign a big account, a large enterprise account, let's say, you also want to engage from the start and say, when you start to see the green lights, let's say the meetings go from discovery, introductory, to you start to see these green lights happen, where you're feeling like they're going to use the product, we can see they're getting buy-in. At that stage, whether that's 1 month in, 2 month in, you can say, hey, look, typically when we sign deals with companies of your size, we have to go through a risk assessment, we have to go through a compliance assessment, and we have to start mapping, what are the big terms and conditions for you. And that is when they will start to reveal a little bit from their end. And you'll also understand how much the buyer signal is. If they say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this, and this, that's a good sign. But if they say, hey, slow down, we're not there yet, then you understand, okay, now you know where they're at. So it's a super important thing.
One of the things that worked for me in relation to what you said, the difference between, for me, as far as I'm concerned, the difference between handling objections and getting the deal over the line is understanding timeline, as you said. And the only way to accelerate that is somehow create urgency and manipulate urgency. Not an easy thing to do. I know it's easier said than done, but manipulating time and getting people to take action quickly is going to be the difference between a good salesperson and a great salesperson, right? And there are several tactics that you can use to get people to act faster. They can be in the form of discounts. They can be in the form of deals that are expiring. They can be in the form of, I'm not the biggest personal fan, but price increases. If you don't take action by X date, then the price goes up by 10%. I personally hate that one because it's been used on me and I hate it. But there are different tactics that you can use, right? I'm sure you can think of some.
Yeah, so in terms of accelerating a deal is, again, these are fundamental things you need to realize from the start is when would they use this and why would they use this product? If you don't figure that out from the start, not their timeline over, hey, when does the deal close, but hey, you guys are interested in using this product, what would you use it for? How would you use it? Where would you use it? Show me some scenarios where you would use it. And when you figure all that out, then you can start to put the pressure on urgency. Then you can start to figure out, hey, pricing, I can use pricing at this stage, or hey, look, we're going to get the onboarding team to get you up and running at this stage. We've set time aside for them so that you guys are ready to go. And you're putting pressure on them by not giving them a discount, but by giving them time and resources to get them up and running. So the biggest way you can increase urgency or dictate urgency is figuring out when they're going to use it, why they're going to use it, what scenarios. And when you've mapped that, then as soon as that contract is signed, you can get them moving. Because the worst thing that happens is getting a deal signed and then waiting 6 to 9 months and nothing happens.
That's brilliant. And I think you've segued us perfectly into the last section, which is creating a really compelling call to action, getting people to take action, being very specific about, okay, like for me, what really works is that it's a very intuitive kind of thing. If you feel like the deal is hot, the prospect is ready to go, objections handled, there's a time need, as you mentioned earlier, then you need to ask that call to action question. When can we sign the deal? When can you hand over the check? Back in the day, of course, you don't hand over checks anymore. When can I get the money transfer in? When can we get the first payment in? When can we get the legal contract signed and good to go? Or when can we onboard you? Very direct, time-bound questions. Any other tactics on creating a stronger call to action?
The biggest one is really, again, I always say go back to the start. It's going to be something you're going to hear in the theme throughout all the time. But honestly, I think getting the call to action really stems from the way that you put the deal together. Do they respect you enough? Do they believe in your authority? Are you someone that's just been walking over the whole deal? If you're said walking over the whole deal, they're never going to respect your time. They're always going to push the meeting. And that's one of the most important things is when you figure out in that deal, what is the call to action to get them moving? Will this call to action make them look better to their boss? Will this call to action make them get a better outcome? If you can figure out how you can make them do better in whatever they're doing, or figure out how this deal is going to benefit the company in terms of the scenario, that person doing the deal, then the call to action becomes a lot easier, a lot more simplified from A to B on when to get them moving. So the biggest advice here is figure out exactly when that call to action is, but also what the outcome of doing the call to action at that point would do for the client.
Absolutely. That's such a strong finish to this episode, Dave. And I think we've really gotten down to the bare bones of how to successfully negotiate a deal. Lots of people out there in the sales world trying to figure this out. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. And here's us finishing off with a strong call to action, guys. Share this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and comment. Tell us about your best sales deal, or tell us about your worst sales deal, or tell us about the challenges you're facing during negotiating with deals. We want to hear all about it so we can help you. Slide into our DMs, put it in the comments, do whatever works for you.
And also remember to like, subscribe, comment, DM, share, and also send money. We are not obliged to that.
Send checks. Yeah.
Send checks. Yes, cash and checks. Snap and necks and cash and checks. All right, guys. Great session there, Abby, and looking forward to the next installment.
Thanks. Awesome session. I think we made some great points together. We'll see you guys on the next episode.